Really a pleasure to do this. The 1873 Winchester model of 1000 is the Winchester Collector's Winchester. There are only about less than 40 known examples, probably in the mid-30s. You can't even really get a good firm number on how many known examples there are. What we're going to talk about first is who Oliver Winchester is and how we actually got to the 1 of 1000 and the Model 73 Winchester. So we're going to start with Oliver Winchester to start with. He was born in Boston, Massachusetts in 1810. He died in 1880, almost just a few days after his 70th birthday. He was quite the interesting investor. He was a hard-working man. As a young child, he started on the farm at age 7, worked during the growing season, went to school when it was cool outside in the non-growing season. He was trained as a carpenter and a home builder, and then specialized in churches. He was successful at that. He got into he left and went to New York and got involved in shirt manufacturing in the retail clothing line. Then he got into the manufacturing. He had a new cut type of a shirt that he sold that was very popular, and he was highly successful, and that's what allowed him to be able to make the kind of investments that he did in companies through venture capital to keep somebody going. He knew that firearms were here to stay, and the opportunity presented itself to him. And if you'll look on the handout sheet, you'll see the 1 of 1000 at the top, but the gun right under it is the Hunt Repeater. There's only one known example of that, and it's in a museum. They didn't really produce the gun, but it was revolutionary in its own right because it was the first lever-action repeating rifle. Walter Hunt was the designer of that particular gun, and he was an inventor. He had plenty of patents. He sold this patent to Louis Jennings. And Louis Jennings got together with some people you might know, Smith & Wesson, Horace Smith and Daniel Wesson. And one of the other fellows that actually joined them later on was a guy by the name of Brian Tyler Henry of the Henry rifle. So through a succession of failures in their businesses, all of these guys knew how to do it, but they never could keep themselves solvent with money. That was the hardest thing. So how these patent guys would do is they would sell the patent, get some money to live on, and to keep their inventive juices flowing to be able to produce these things. And that's where Oliver Winchester comes in. He got into the business through the Smith-Jennings patent is what he bought. Louis Jennings bought the Hunt patent, and he filed for a new patent called the Hunt Improved patent. And that's where the next gun, it was a single action repeater, looked basically the same except it had one lever instead of two. And they were revolutionary in their own right, but they were very undependable. Even after they started to produce them, they figured out that it was no way they could do it. It was too expensive to manufacture. The next gun to come along in that chain would be the Henry rifle, and you can see down here on the bottom, this is the grandfather of the Winchester rifle right here. The Henry. The rifle before that, which we do not have an example of, is called a Volcanic, and Oliver Winchester was the prime investor in that company. He forced Volcanic into insolvency after Benjamin Tyler Henry just tried to take it away from him when Oliver Winchester was out of the country. And anyway, they started the Henry rifle. Well, they made the Henry rifle, and it was the New Haven Arms Company. This particular gun was the first cartridge gun that was produced. And what was revolutionary about it was that you could actually load it and cock it all in the same motion. You had one forward motion and one motion back, and you could extract a round, load a round, and fire it over those two on that one single motion action. That was the revolutionary part about it. It held 15 rounds in the magazine and one in the chamber, but it was pretty unsafe gun to carry that way because it had no safety mechanism at all on it. The hammer was laying down on it all the time. So So if you carried it around loaded, you must be ready for action. But what really, the revolutionary thing about that gun was that you never had to stop firing to load it. You could fire a round and load another round in it. And how that came about is after Benjamin Henry was let go from the Henry Rifle Company, Oliver Winchester got a hold of Nelson King, was his new shop foreman and engineer. And Nelson King redesigned the Henry and turned it into the model 1866. When that gun was produced, what was novel about it was that the whole magazine mechanism was redesigned, and so was the frame. It still shot the Henry 44 rimfire cartridge. There was no centerfire ammunition at the time. They developed that. It was a pretty good round from the volcanic round that had about a 600 feet per second velocity. This one had nearly 1,200 feet per second, about 1,125 feet per second in velocity. So when you go from the Henry, which was revolutionary in its own right, all the way up to the Model 66, which when it was released wasn't called the Model 66, it was called the Winchester rifle. Later on, gun collectors and people decided they would call it the Model 1866 because that's when it was introduced. When the Model 73 came around, it was revolutionary again in its own right, and what made it revolutionary is it used King's improved patent side-loading gate like the Model 66 did, but it was a centerfire cartridge. It was a 44-40, and it would shoot the same ammunition as a Colt revolver, but Winchester developed a cartridge and Colt made a pistol that would use that cartridge. So somebody out on the range could carry a 44-40 in his holster. He also carried the same ammunition for his rifle. The Model 73, as we all know, is what they call the gun that won the West. They made 720,610 of them. So they made a lot of them. And over 720,600 guns. Production run went from the first one was delivered out of the factory in 1874. The production run ran until 1919. The last gun to leave the plant was in 1924. And so there are just a tremendous amount of Model 73s still exist today. And they range in value from about $1,500 to $2,500, but the better they are, the condition's everything on those. And then you get to the Model 1 of 1,000. Well, that was an early idea that Oliver Winchester had. He was a marketing guru, and he kept his company name in front of prospective buyers all over the United States. He marketed his guns constantly because he wanted everybody to buy a Winchester. They were reliable, and they just kept going and kept going. You just couldn't hardly wear one out. And if you look at some of them that still shoot, you wonder how. But it's really amazing what he did with his marketing campaign and how he promoted his company. And it turned into an extremely wealthy man before it was all said and done. The 1 of 1,000 was an idea that he had he promulgated to get more money for his guns. And some people write, well, why did Winchester ever produce a Model 1 of 1,000? Well, he could get $100. That's what a new 1 of 1,000 sold for, was $100. When in today's money, that's about $2,300. A Model 73 normally, in the beginning, sold for about $50, but as production increased, the price dropped down to between $22 to $27. We have an 1893 catalog here in the museum that I was looking in, and a Model 1873 standard model sold for $18 wholesale to a dealer. So just, kind of an interesting, and really it probably depended on how far they had to ship the gun as to what it sold for in the end, just about like it does today. How far have you got to truck it before you get it to a retail outlet? And but so what he did is he decided to market the 1 of 1,000 like that, and And he thought it was a great idea, but everybody else thought it was a bad idea because what it left, the impression it left is that the guns that you were selling were inferior guns. He thought, I'll introduce a gun that most people can't afford, that some can, and then I'll sell them what they can afford. But they had the impression that, that the other rifle was an inferior firearm. One of the past engineers engineers for Winchester said that we don't know why he did it, because all of the guns shot well. What Winchester did on every barrel they manufactured, they fired that barrel. And the barrels were fired, and barrels that made extra targets, barrels that made extra merit on the target were set aside. And they figured out in the production process about 1 out of 1,000, every one that rolled off the assembly line shot, kind of hit the sweet spot. You know, when you first make the bore on the barrel and the first time you use the tool to the last time you use the broach that cuts it, and it has to stay within a certain specification, so they've got limits on both ends, tighter and loose. And that's where it hit its sweet spot. And it was accurate, but really all of the guns shot pretty well. And what I mean by pretty well is that if you can keep 5 rounds on a dinner plate at 100 yards, that's a good shooting Winchester. You know, and you stop and think about it. And they got more accurate as the quality of the ammunition increased. These guns were all black powder guns. They were not smokeless powder. So they shot a black powder cartridge, but as the bullet design improved, the accuracy improved on the guns. When we get to the 1 of 1,000, about 136 Model 73s were produced in the 1 of 1,000. The next grade of gun, they would, as I said, they would fire the barrels, they would grade the barrels, and they would attach a target to the barrel, and then the barrels would be fitted to a gun and to the rest of the mechanism. When they did that, when they got a barrel that wasn't so fine, but was still better than the average barrel, that was called a 1 of 100. So it was a not so fine barrel. And they only did 8 of those, so nobody was interested in a 1 of 100. They are much more rare. They did 53 Model 76s, completely different gun, and we have one here in the case. It's, I believe, right here. Right there, a Model 76. You can notice if you just look at the 2 guns, you can see the frame is larger. It's a larger caliber gun. And they made also 8 1 of 100s of that particular firearm. But this Model 73 is what we're talking about, and we're going to get into some of the details on that particular gun. All right, there we go. We're still up. If you look at it, you'll notice that the stock has highly figured walnut. And they graded them from 1X to 5X. Most of the 1 of 1,000 guns had 3 to 5X stocks on them. They were checkered automatically. They were case hardened. All Model 1 of 1,000 guns were case hardened. And it's a coloring, and you'll notice on the gun right under it, it's a better example of the case hardening. You can see the case hardening on this Winchester here, how it's different colors. It's blue and maybe a slight orange tinge to it. The Model of 1,000s were done that way, and that was for wear number 1 and rust prevention number 2. They were also fitted with a Tang sight, the peep sight that was mounted down on the Tang. That was an option that was standard on a 1 of 1,000 gun. The barrels were also etched. Originally, when you talk about Winchesters, you talk about the early guns and the earliest guns. So earliest being, it's kind of confusing, but earliest being the guns they manufactured in the very beginning. They were marked 1 of 1,000 numerically. After about serial number 1,000 or maybe 2,000, they went to a script, engraved in script, and there was scroll work done around it. And they're all marked on top of the barrel, right at the breech, right ahead of the frame on the barrel, and right in between that and the sight. When you take a look at it, you can see that also have a platinum band around the end of the barrel and at the breech where it goes into the frame. Very highly figured. And what's interesting, we have in the book, when we get through talking about it, you can take a look, and I've got the page turned where you can look and see that they're not all exactly alike. You know, you would think today if you had a special firearm that they would all look a certain way, but you had different engravers that were coming down the line. There could be a huge difference between a gun that was manufactured two serial numbers away as opposed to the gun ahead of it or behind it. Could look completely different. And there's a real good example of all of that right here in the book if you'll take a look at that. These guns weren't any more popular than any other Winchester. You could order a Winchester Model 73 from Winchester Repeating Arms just about any way you wanted. You could have it nickel plated, you could have it gold plated, you could have it silver plated. You could have it engraved in any kind of scene you would want to. And what's amazing about it is you could have all of that engraving done for just a few dollars. Not a lot of money, just a few dollars. But then again, $5 was a lot of money when considering the gun only cost 20 or 25 at the most. So you were spending a lot of money extra on that particular work to have done to the gun. Exactly. They were. There was a movie produced in 1951 that had Jimmy Stewart in it and Shelley Winters, and the Winchester 73 was the movie, and the first 20 people that could prove they owned a 1 of 1,000 gun got a brand new Model 94. And they found 21 guns. I don't know what they did with that. I don't know if they gave the other guy a one or not. But that's where the interest started peaking in the Model 1 of 1,000, because when you see some of the other Winchesters that are engraved, just like our Model 66 here, if you look at, that's a nickel-plated gun or silver-plated that most of the silver's worn off, a very highly engraved, really a nice example. Our gun, it has honest wear and use on it. There are a few really extra fine examples that are known, but maybe less than 3. Most of the guns are in this condition here, and I would consider this gun here probably in good condition. But they're rare in any condition, regardless of what's happened to them over their lifetime. They're still extremely valuable. You can see the wear in this one. It's got a little separation in the wood where the forearm piece goes on, and also around the stock in the back. So that tells you that it's been exposed to a lot of extremes in temperature, hot and cold, damp, and things like that. But it's survived in pretty remarkable condition, considering it left that particular gun left the factory in 1876. So it's an early gun. The serial number is 13,322. So it's an early run production. I don't know where it falls in the 1 of 1,000 range, how many were made before that, because the first 1 of 1,000 was introduced in the catalog in 1875 in the middle of the year. So that was produced about a year after. They could be ordered. Winchester didn't fit all the barrels right away. They shipped a few of them to gun dealers that they thought could sell them, that had the clientele that could support spending $100 on that rifle. They kept the rest of the barrels in stock and inventory when somebody wanted a special gun or they wanted a gun sent back. They would, as long as Winchester modified it, that's all you need to know about a Winchester. If somebody else has been tinkering with it, then it loses its value. This particular gun is a rifle configuration. They made 3 different configurations: a 20 inch as a carbine, 24 inch as a rifle, 27 as a musket. They could be ordered in any barrel length combination in 2-inch increments. There were guns as short as 12 inches. Most commonly, the short guns they call the trappers are 15-inch barrels. They sold a lot of them in Mexico. That picture down there we have in the Museum of the Mexican Revolution, almost all of them are holding Model 73s, downstairs. So it was widely used. a little fact about that. The United States Army during the Civil War wasn't particularly interested in the Henry rifle at the time. It had the metallic cartridge in it, which was good, but they didn't really like a few things about it. First of all, it had no dust cover on it on top to let dirt down in it. It had an open magazine that had a follower that you had to follow. You'll notice the Henry has no forearm piece on it. So that's one of the reasons they rejected it, but they did buy enough of them to outfit a couple of companies with these rifles, and the guys loved it. And nearly every Henry that was ever made, not all of them, but the large majority saw action in the Civil War, because you could buy a Henry then for about $15. And of course that was a lot of money, you know, for somebody that probably didn't make $100 a year. And that was during the Civil War. So, and their families would buy them for the soldiers, and those guys are the ones that, you know, really really did well and survived. They had that firearm. You get up to the 1866. One of the big differences between the two is this one has a forearm piece on it, as you can see. So does the Model 73. They created a lot of heat with the black powder. They could shoot basically all day long with it. This was a little harder to reload than the Model 73 and the Model 66. But this was the gun that, what's interesting, well, they actually, the last gun left the factory in 1924, and John Browning, which designed a lot of Winchesters after Oliver Winchester had passed away. And he ordered probably the last or the next to the last model of 1000. And Winchester had a couple of barrels left, or maybe one barrel left, and they built this gun especially for him, exactly how he wanted it, in a .44-40 caliber, when any number of other models of Winchesters later designed better quality center fire guns were available at the time. He wanted that particular gun, and there's a picture of it in this book. I'll flip that page after we get through looking at it, and you can see it. So that just tells you what kind of reputation a model of 1000 had. Even, you know, and it's amazing that it never caught on up until 1950. And then the values have just skyrocketed with those particular guns. And then you've got to deal with the fakes, and they're easy to fake. And somebody, I read in the book that a letter does not necessarily validate the gun. A factory letter. You have to look at the gun and have someone look at it that knows a Winchester's to know that, and have the side covers taken apart, because in the Model 70, 73, one of 1000s, they all have job numbers written on the parts, and the parts get extra care as far as finish and fit goes when those guns were assembled. So there is a marked difference in the internal quality of the gun versus your standard Model 73. There were other calibers made in the Model 73. You had a .38-40, a .32-20, and a .22 long rifle, but none of those calibers were made, I can tell, even came out by the time the model of 1000 was really out of, all those barrels were already done, not unless you went to Winchester and had them remake you a barrel in a specific caliber. But it would either be one of those. I don't think there's any .22 long rifles, and I don't believe there's. The .32-20 is the rarest. The .38-40, and what's odd about the .38-40, it's actually a 40 caliber round. They just call it a .38-40. 38 caliber, 40 grains of black powder. But it's actually a 40 caliber hole. For whatever reason,
What kind of range did this have on it?
Probably they would. Winchester led you to believe, and some of the advertisers on the 1 of 1000 gun in particular, that it would have a 1-inch group at 500 yards. Well, no, you'd have to, it wouldn't shoot 500 yards. You'd have to hold it up, you know, and lob it out there. But that was the impression that they got from the type of marketing that Oliver Winchester did, his marketing group did. By the time they got from 1847, when they first did the patent on the Hunt repeater, up until the Henry, was probably 15 years. You had a volcanic before that, and it shot the rocket ball ammunition, an improved version of the rocket ball, but nevertheless, and you know, they were, even with all of their faults and frailty, and they were just still miles ahead of everything else. You would definitely pick that up before you picked anything else up. So anyway, the gun that won the West, everybody, right there.